Consent to enter into a colloquy for 30 minutes with the senators from Montana, North Carolina, and Iowa.
Without objection.
Mr. President, last week we had a lot going on in terms of national security, foreign policy facing our country, and most importantly, facing our troops, facing our military. The President, the Secretary of Defense, the top leaders in the military were asking a lot of our troops in 1 week. Let me just give you a little example of that. Just yesterday, Secretary of Defense Ash Carter announced from Iraq, where he is, that the U.S. will be deploying 560 more troops to Iraq in our fight against ISIS. And, Mr. President, make no doubt about it, the White House might spin what we're doing over there, but our troops are definitely in combat, fighting to protect us. At the NATO summit on Friday, President Obama announced that the U.S. will be deploying an additional 1,000 troops and a separate brigade headquarters to Poland. A lot of us, I think, bipartisan, support what's going on at the NATO summit. Congratulate the President for a successful summit. On Wednesday, the President announced that he plans to leave 8,400 American troops in Afghanistan, more than he originally planned, a number that a lot of us had been advocating for, maybe even more, to combat the Taliban. Again, our troops in action. On Saturday, we learned that North Korea launched a submarine ballistic missile off the coast of its eastern part of the country. And over the weekend, the Wall Street Journal reported that even after reaching the Iran nuclear deal, the Iranians continue to try to illegally procure nuclear equipment from Germany. And finally, just today, Mr. President, there was an important ruling from The Hague, the tribunal there, about what's going on in the South China Sea and keeping sea lanes open, where we just recently had two carrier battle groups, two U.S. carrier battle groups, thousands of sailors in that part of the world. So what did the Senate do with regard to all the activity facing our troops? What did the United States Senate do to support these troops that the President and the Secretary of Defense are asking so much of? Well, a lot of Americans didn't see it, but in the late at night, on Thursday night, led by the minority leader, unfortunately, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle filibustered defense spending, filibustered the defense appropriations bill. And, Mr. President, this isn't the first time that that's happened. Indeed, that's the bill that the other side seems to like to target. Amazingly, they like to target funding for our troops and our military. That's not the first time. It's not the second time. It's not the third time. It is the fourth time inside of a year that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle filibustered funding our troops at a time when national security challenges and what we're asking our military to do is at an all-time high. So, Mr. President, what I want to do with my colleagues here is talk about this. Try to let the American people know that this is not what we should be doing. And perhaps the media will talk about this and highlight this a little bit more. Because we're going to vote again on this appropriations bill, which, by the way, came out of committee unanimously. All the Democrats on that committee voted for it. And yet somehow, when it comes to the floor, they're going to do another filibuster. They did it last Thursday. It is our hope, and one of the reasons we're on the floor right now is to convince our colleagues to change their ways. I'm sure they don't want to have to go home over recess and have to explain to their constituents why they voted not once, but twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, but 5 times filibustering spending for our troops. I hope they don't have to do that. We're going to vote on that again this week, Mr. President. I am honored to be on the floor with some distinguished members of the United States Senate, some of the members of the class of 2014, and I'm going to ask the junior senator from Iowa, who knows a little bit about what she's talking about when it comes to the United States military, with 23 years of military service, just having retired as a lieutenant colonel in the Iowa National Guard. And I'm honored to have her open up and say some words about really something that's remarkable that's going on the Senate floor. Filibustering the spending of our troops at this dangerous time is not what we should be doing. And our colleagues know it, and I guarantee you the American people know it. If you ask people, Democrat or Republican, should we be funding our troops at this moment? The answer clearly in every state and every part of the country would be yes. Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan, this distinguished senator from Alaska. Thank you for your passion. As well, you have served in the Marines, in the Marine Reserve. I want to thank you for that, for your dedication and commitment to our United States of America through your service as a Marine and now through your service in the United States Senate. We're also joined today by the senators from Montana and from North Carolina. I'd like to thank my colleagues for joining in the colloquy today. But the filibuster that we have seen on the other side of the aisle sends a message to our troops that we don't care about their security and we don't care about the nation's security. We must fund our troops at a time when you stated the world is virtually imploding. We see actions going on all around the globe, whether it's from North Africa into Iraq, Syria, North Korea, China, Iran, Afghanistan. We could go on and on where our troops are needed for safety and security, where they are needed to keep the fight away from our homeland. So I want to thank everyone that's joining in today. I appreciate the thoughts that we'll be sharing with our constituents and with the audience that we have here. And hopefully we will see this projected nationwide with an outcry of outrage that the Democrats are daring to block funding for our national security. This is a bipartisan bill. The Senate version cleared out of our Senate Armed Services Committee by a vote of 30-0. Democrats and Republicans, we came together, bipartisan, 30-0. And the House bill pending before us passed with 48 members of the minority party in support. In total, this bill appropriates $515.9 billion for our national security. $900 million of this is funding for the National Guard, a critical arm to the security of the United States, and where I ended my 23-plus year career last November in the Iowa Army National Guard. In fact, my old unit, the battalion that I commanded in the Iowa Army National Guard, that battalion headquarters is currently forward deployed. So the men and women that I served alongside, they are out there protecting our freedoms. They are out there securing an area far away from home. They're doing it not just for me and not just for the senators that are here, but they are doing that for all of you. And the fact that we would reject funding for our forward deployed troops is appalling to me. These are my brothers and sisters. These are my friends, my neighbors, my colleagues. And they're fighting on behalf of the United States. And the United States is now turning its back with a filibuster on those troops. So how dare our colleagues block a bill to fund our military while our troops are forward deployed? They're out on our front lines. And I know that my colleague from Montana has had some troops that have just recently returned, and I know that he would like to join us in this discussion as well, the senator from Montana. I yield the floor.
I want to thank the senator from Iowa, and I also want to thank Lieutenant Colonel Ernst, as well as Senator Ernst, for her service to our nation. Senator Ernst is the first female combat veteran to ever serve in the United States Senate. It's an honor to serve with you, Senator Ernst, and thank you for your service to our country, both as a soldier as well as a senator. Mr. President, as I speak today, my friends from across the aisle have already not once, not twice, but 3 times blocked consideration of the Department of Defense Appropriation Act of 2017, which will deny our troops the proper funding and support they deserve. And I'm proud to be standing here with some of my freshman colleagues, imploring my friends on the other side of the aisle to stop the political games, get back to work, and that starts with funding our military. We shouldn't be playing these petty political games on legislation that is and should be historically bipartisan. In fact, this bill, the Defense Appropriations Act, it passed the House of Representatives in June on a bipartisan vote of 282 to 138. That included 48 Democrats. That's a very strong bipartisan vote. And now over on the Senate side, and as a member of the Appropriations Committee, I recall clearly it passed our committee 30-0. That's called running up the score. 30-0 out of the Senate Committee on Appropriations May 26. Not one Democrat opposed this bill in committee. And I asked my colleagues, what in the world has changed? Why did it go from 30-0 in the committee, and now we're seeing a filibuster here on the floor of the United States Senate? And just so we're all clear, when Senate Democrats vote no, here's what they're saying no to. 1.2 million military active duty, 800,000 reservists. They're saying no to 10,000 troops engaged in combat in Afghanistan and the additional military in harm's way in Iraq, in Syria, and other places throughout the world. You know, we're seeing ISIS expanding into places like Libya. They're attacking Western targets like Paris, like Brussels, and the homeland here in places like San Bernardino as well as Orlando. We need to make sure our military forces have the tools they need to win. Because as Marco Rubio once said, it's either we win or they win. There's no middle ground here. Let's give them the tools they need to win. Because I can tell you one thing, our enemies, they're not waiting around for the Senate Democrats to fund our military to make it a fair fight. This bill provides money to replace the munitions and other consumable items that are being used in defending America against the likes of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the Taliban. Passing this also gives confidence to our Eastern European allies. And back in my home state of Montana, we have a rich legacy of service. I'm the son of a U.S. Marine. My dad served with the 58th Rifle Company in Billings, Montana. And in fact, our nation's peace through strength strategy, we see that clearly at Montana's Malmstrom Air Force Base. You see, up in Montana, we have 1/3 of the nation's intercontinental ballistic missiles. We played a critical role in meeting our nation's security and military needs. In fact, I have the utmost faith, always do, in the 1,200 defenders at Malmstrom that provide security for the missiles that silently sit across Montana. And I know these airmen will not fail our nation, but Washington, D.C. is failing them, and Senate Democrats are failing them, and it is unacceptable. At Malmstrom, the commander's coin, their motto is this. It says, scaring the hell out of America's enemies since 1962. They do so because this body chose duty over politics. So how can they continue to stand here and say no to our military when so much is at stake? When the U.S. House passed a bipartisan bill, when this body passed by unanimous vote, 30-0, the bill out of committee, we must say yes to our military who fight for us every day and say no to petty politics in Washington, D.C. We must stand up for the rights and the freedoms that we enjoy. Senate Democrats, stop saying no. Let us debate the DOD appropriations bill. And finally, I urge my Senate colleagues across the aisle, have the courage to vote against the wishes of their leader and help us move this legislation forward. And again, I'm proud to stand here with some of my Senate freshman colleagues and the distinguished senator from North Carolina, Thom Tillis. I know, Senator Tillis, you have some real concerns what's going on in the Senate floor.
Thank you. Mr. President, I want to thank my friends and colleagues from Montana, Alaska, and Iowa for being here. I particularly want to thank Lieutenant Colonel Ernst for her service. She's now a veteran, but she served bravely. And I want to thank my friend from Alaska. He's a Marine. He still answers the call, and he's still doing the work here in the Senate, but prepared to go on a moment's notice wherever we have to go to defend freedom. And ladies and gentlemen, I come from North Carolina. This is almost getting personal with me, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it. But I also want to explain to people who may be watching this on the television or those in the gallery what we're talking about. You use the word filibuster, and it's kind of hard to understand. It's pretty straightforward. The Democratic Conference has decided to say no to funding our troops. They've decided to say no to providing them a much-deserved pay raise. They've decided to say no to funding important training that's necessary to make sure that they can complete these highly dangerous and complex missions wherever a threat may occur. Why is it personal to me in North Carolina? Because I've got about 100,000 active duty personnel in North Carolina. Fort Bragg in North Carolina is the home of the Global Response Force. That is the base that gets the call from the president when, at a moment's notice, we may have to send hundreds or thousands of men and women in airplanes to drop out of them anywhere in the world. And it's not just jumping out with a parachute. It's jumping out with 100 pounds of equipment attached to you. It's dropping earth movers, weather stations, a small city operation anywhere in the world to support a relief effort or to support a combat mission. That takes training. That takes constant training. It takes hours and hours of training to make sure that they can complete their mission, but even as important, to make sure they do it safely and that they themselves do not get injured and killed in the process. Now, you've already heard it said multiple times before, but I think it bears repeating. Why on earth would the minority leader prevent us from moving to a vote? A filibuster is nothing more than saying no to sending this bill to the president's desk. After 30 Democratic members in Appropriations said yes, we only need 6 of them to move this bill to the president's desk. But I guess that the minority leader has a hammerlock on all of the members who want to vote for this bill. But they won't come down to this floor and show the courage and commitment to the men and women in uniform to do the right thing. That's where we are. That's why it's personal to me. What do I tell the 100,000 active duty military in North Carolina when I go home? I'm sorry, but the majority of the minority leaders decided that you're not a priority. In spite of the fact that we go to Senate Armed Services Committee hearings weekly and we hear that the threat level has never been greater, in spite of the fact that we see the rise of ISIS across all of the Middle East and now in Europe and threatening our homeland. In spite of all of these threats, we tell the men and women in uniform, their commanders, that politics is over the principle of funding our troops and saving our nation, protecting our nation. I think that that's despicable. We know that we have enough votes to send this bill to the president because they voted for it before. We only need a third of them to vote for this now and send it to the president's desk. I could go on, and if we have time, I hope that Senator Sullivan will ask me some questions because I spend a lot of time down at Camp Lejeune at Fort Bragg. Ask me about whether or not the leader of FORSCOM and the leaders down there responsible for the 82nd Airborne, the 18th Airborne Corps, thinks they have enough money and that they can keep our men and women safe. Ask them about the conditions at Camp Lejeune and the conditions we ask these men and women to serve in after we tell them we're not going to give you money to keep you safe so that you can complete your mission. This is politics at its worst. We need to send this bill to the president's desk. We need to show respect for the men and women who have sworn an oath to lay down their life for the cause of freedom. This is a failure on the part of the minority leader and on the part of any other person who would sit there and refuse to move through a bill that every single one of them in the Appropriations Committee supported. And Senator Sullivan, I appreciate you elevating this dialogue to the extent that you will. And we shouldn't stop until we fulfill the promise. First and foremost, our constitutional obligation is to protect this nation. And the people who are voting against this bill, preventing it from going to the desk, in my opinion, are failing to withhold and live up to their oath. And Senator Sullivan and Senator Ernst, again, I want to thank you for your service, and I want to thank you for bringing this to the attention of the American people.
Well, thank you, Senator Tillis. And, you put your finger on it when you said it's personal. I think it's personal to all of us. Senator Ernst talked about she's literally got her former colleagues, the troops she commanded in Afghanistan right now. There's nothing more personal than that. And like Senator Tillis, Senator Daines, the great state of Alaska also has thousands and thousands of active duty Army, Air Force, Coast Guard, Marines, reservists, veterans. And they're wondering, I get asked, why? Why would the minority leader filibuster spending for America's troops? Isn't that like the most important thing the Congress of the United States does, national defense? Why? And why on earth would they consider doing it a fifth time before we go home on recess? The one thing we should be doing before we take a 2-month recess, when, as Senator Ernst said, the whole world is imploding with national security challenges, is voting to fund our troops. So why? I really don't know the answer. You know, at one point, the minority leader came down here last year and said the bill was a, quote, waste of time. Well, I'm not sure most Americans would agree with him on that. Then they made some kind of excuse that, well, we need to make sure the appropriations bill fits with the bipartisan budget agreement from last year. Well, it does. Nobody's making that argument. He was even recently stated saying he doesn't want his party to be, quote, at the mercy of Republicans. In essence, that blocking our defense budget gives his political party leverage. Well, I'll tell you who gets leverage from blocking this funding: our enemies and our adversaries, and not our troops. So there's one other myth here, and I think I hear it a lot. You know, when these procedural votes happen in the Senate, the troops don't really see it. They don't really understand it. Heck, this vote that they took to block it last time on Thursday night was almost at midnight. Maybe nobody saw it. But I want to ask Senator Ernst, do you think the troops see this? Do you think they understand what's going on? Do you think your troops in Afghanistan or in the Iowa National Guard or all the other military members that we've gotten to know through our positions on the armed services, do you think they see what's happening, and how do you think that impacts morale?
Thank you. Yes, of course they pay attention. They see what's going on in the United States Senate. We track this. I tracked this when I was a young captain serving in Kuwait and Iraq. We track this because it's so important that we have the funding necessary for our personnel, just basic funding of our human resource obligation to the United States Armed Forces. Our personnel, we have to have funding to update our equipment, and we have to have the funding for the training necessary so that our men and women are ready and able to forward deploy. And even when they're forward deployed, Iraq, Afghanistan, you name it, they pay attention. It is vitally important that what we do here today is vote on the DoD appropriations bill. We have to stop this filibuster. Our troops are paying attention. Their families are paying attention. Their families here in the United States want to know that the United States Senate is doing the right thing by protecting our military, making sure that we have the troops necessary, the equipment necessary, the training necessary to make sure that when they forward deploy, that they come home safe again. That's number one, making sure that they are properly trained, equipped, and manned so that they come home safe. So yes, Senator Sullivan, they do pay attention. So as we're standing here debating the importance of this appropriations bill, we have almost 10,000 troops serving today, right now, in Afghanistan. We have almost 5,000 troops in Iraq, and our special operators are deployed throughout the world, protecting our nation. And just last week, I had the opportunity to visit a hospital and see one of those special operators. And I'm going to come back to that special operator in just a second. Now, I stated before, the world is imploding, and we only have to look at the headlines over the last several days to see what a risk our globe is in. North Korea test fires a ballistic missile from a submarine on July 9th. The Chinese Navy holds a live fire drill in the South China Sea. even after the International Court has ruled against their claims in the region. Iran, who is now, oddly enough, being fueled by taxpayer dollars after the horrific nuclear deal our administration entered in, they drove their boats dangerously close to ours once again, came dangerously close to American ships. And U.S. intelligence reports come forward saying ISIS is adapting to our current efforts. These are the things, folks, that keep me up at night. These are the things that keep many of us up at night. But what lets us rest a little more at ease is knowing that we have the airmen, the Marines, the soldiers, those sailors that are forward deployed or guarding our homeland. That's what puts my mind at rest, is knowing that we have these brave men and women doing their job for us. They are not failing us. So back to this special operator that I visited in the hospital last week. This young man had been shot 4 times, forward deployed into a theater in the Middle East. 4 times, 2 weeks ago. When I came into his hospital room, he was standing up. He was pretty proud to show me his wounds. Standing up, shot 4 times, special operator. But what he didn't bemoan was the fact that he had been injured severely. What he was bemoaning to me is the fact that he was not with his unit. And he said, "Ma'am, I have no idea how long it's going to take me to heal, but I am ready to go back and serve with my unit. I am ready to go back." These are the men and women that we need to be funding, folks. They are our defense, our national defense. So I'm asking that the filibuster end and we take a vote on the DoD appropriations bill. And I know we'd like to hear a little more from my colleagues. Again, I want to thank them for coming to the floor. Senator from Montana, the Senator from North Carolina, and thank you, Senator from Alaska, for leading us in this discussion today. I'll yield the floor to the Senator from Montana.
Well, it's truly an honor to think that we are standing here as senators with 2 distinguished veterans, Lieutenant Colonel Ernst, as well as Senator Sullivan, who serves in the United States Marines. In fact, tonight I'll be at Iwo Jima at the parade tonight with my daughter, honoring my dad, a Marine, and honoring the men and women who serve and wear the great uniform of the United States military. Let me just sum it up this. There's one group that's cheering right now, and that's our enemies. They're cheering the fact that this body cannot get a defense appropriations bill passed. Maybe we should tie congressional pay to this bill. Maybe say, you know what? Could ask the minority leader, let's put congressional pay in here. And maybe that would get the body to act, to move forward here, to say, if we're going to not fund our military, let's not fund this body right here. If you can't pass a defense appropriations bill, we shouldn't get a paycheck here in Washington, D.C. We had to stand with the men and women here who depend on these appropriations, because what this body is saying no to, this filibuster, is saying no to military personnel. It's saying no to operations and maintenance. It's saying no to procuring what we need here to take the fight to the enemy. It's saying no to research, development, testing, and evaluation to make sure that our men and women who wear the uniform of the United States military have the very best tools they need to defeat a very real enemy. So I want to thank my colleagues, my freshman colleagues, for coming to the floor here today. Senator Sullivan, thank you for leading this effort here as we're discussing why we need to stop the filibuster and pass the defense appropriations bill.
And Senator Sullivan, you asked Senator Ernst about whether or not you think people in uniform are watching. Let's talk about other people that are watching. What about the families of those men and women in uniform? The ones that the Democrats have decided to say no to for a pay raise. My wife and I have adopted Fort Bragg as a place where she started a program called Baby Bundles, where we create these bundles that we give to expectant families, E4s and below. These men and women have very little. They're serving their nation. They're not making a lot of money. We're trying to do our best to make up that by providing them with these gifts as they bring a child into the world. But what about that mother or father who's behind as their loved one is somewhere in harm's way? What are they thinking about when they come home during training and say, you know, we're just not getting the jumps that we were getting. We're not getting the equipment that we were getting. And sweetie, I'm about to be deployed. That's happening. That's what this no stands for. That's what this action on the part of the Democrats stand for. We need to vote for this bill. We need to show military families and men and women in uniform that we support them. And I encourage my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to move this bill to the President's desk. Thank you, Mr. President.
May I ask unanimous consent for a minute to conclude this colloquy?
Without objection.
Mr. President, I just want to thank my colleagues who bring honor to the Senate by coming down here and talking about this important issue. And for those of you watching at home, you should be calling your senator and telling them, fund our troops. Fund our troops. We need to make sure that we do not go on a 2-month recess when there's so many national security challenges out there without funding our troops and moving forward on this bill. We should not move forward on a vote to have another filibuster vote, the 5th one in a year, the only bill that seems to get the focus of our colleagues and the minority leader to filibuster. We need to do the right thing. We need to do the right thing by the American people, and we need to do the right thing by our troops. Fund the troops, break the filibuster, and we need to move forward. I certainly hope my colleagues on the other side are going to finally see the light and vote to move forward funding for our military, national security, and our troops and our family. I yield the floor.
Time from now.